o'clock. Just for the sake of time, I think we should probably go ahead and get started. I know there's probably going to be some people coming in, but yeah, this is the third installment of the Feed Fund Hunger Summit. We want to thank everyone for coming today. The first two sessions were highly successful, and we won't fall short this time. For those that might not have been on the first two sessions, my name is Terrence Hunter. I'm the Mississippi Delta Fellow for Delta Directions, Delta Directions Consortium. And we're bringing the Feed Fund Hunger Summit to you today because we know what state of what the pandemic is doing to places like the Delta, and we're trying to provide information to better serve those communities and also other parts of the state. So today we're going to have a presentation from our Harvard Law School partners, and they're going to give a presentation on some of the issues they found during the pandemic. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that the Maddox Foundation will be giving away a $250 door prize to a random participant today. We're going to announce that towards the end of the session. And just stay tuned. And then we're also going to hear from Keith Fulcher, going to give you some more information on the CARES Act grant funding. Just any updates that he might have, just so everyone can stay up to date. Okay, so without further ado, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Emma, I will allow you to introduce the Harvard Law School team.
Great, thanks, Terrence. So I just wanted to start off by giving maybe a little bit more context of who we are and why we're all here. So my name, as Terrence mentioned, is Emma. I'm a clinical instructor with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic. My colleague Joseph, who is a fellow with the clinic, is going to give a little bit more of an introduction to the clinic itself. But I wanted to share that we actually have worked for a long time really closely with the Community Foundation of Northwest Mississippi through the Delta Directions Consortium. And the folks in the Delta Directions Consortium, as many of you know, are the folks you've seen leading some of these other calls. So we, of course, have Terrence as the Delta Fellow and kind of at the helm of our activities on the ground, to the extent we can have activities on the ground during COVID-19. But as many of you know, John Green, Lin Wu, and some of the other folks you've seen presenting on these calls are all part of this Delta Directions consortium that we've worked with for many years. And so this partnership really began with Emily Broad-Lieb, who is now the director of the clinic that we all work at. But she started in Terrence's position back in 2008 as the Mississippi Delta Fellow. And once she returned to Harvard Law School and started the clinic, the Food Law and Policy Clinic, we've stayed connected with the Delta Directions Consortium and collaborated on a lot of different projects. I'd also like to mention, just because I think some folks may be familiar with them too, we also have a student group called the Mississippi Delta Project. And that is a group of students they're volunteer law students who connect with partner organizations working on policy projects in the Mississippi Delta. And I wanted to highlight that over the course of the fall, the students actually organized a speaker series where they heard from a number of folks who are really leading community-based change in the Mississippi Delta region, and even featured some speakers from the organizations that are here today on this call. And so we really appreciated that. We appreciated the insights and the leadership that you all have shared with our students. And so today we're really excited to share some of our work that we do in the clinic that's really focused on food waste, but food waste as it connects to food donations and redirecting food waste to supporting food banks and other institutions that are serving folks, especially in the wake of COVID-19 and the increased demand that we've seen. So with that background, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our fellow Joseph Beckman, who is going to kick off the presentation that he and two of our currently enrolled law school students will be giving you today.
Thanks, Emma. And hello, everyone. Before we begin, I would just like to inform you that the slide deck that we're about to show you, that we're using for our presentation, as well as our Mississippi-specific fact sheets, which we'll go into in a little more detail later, will be made available to you after today's presentation. The fact sheets are currently in draft mode, and we did that intentionally as we would extremely appreciate and welcome your feedback and questions on them prior to our publication. So without further ado, on behalf of the Food Law and Policy Clinic at Harvard Law School, I'd like to thank you all for attending and welcome you to our presentation on food donation laws and policies in Mississippi. My name, as was mentioned, is Joseph Beckman, and I'm a clinical fellow with the Food Law and Policy Clinic. I recently graduated from the University of Wisconsin Law School and am a Chicago native, which is actually where I'm calling in from today. I went into law school with the intention of specializing in food law and policy, and had the pleasure of working in this capacity in both the public and private sector. But then upon graduation this summer, I lucked out in finding this clinic and the wonderful opportunity to become one of the clinic's attorneys. At the Food Law and Policy Clinic, I'm also one of the team leads on our clinic's food waste team. Our food waste team does specialize in researching, analyzing, and presenting recommendations on food waste reduction efforts on the federal, state, and local level. And joining me today are our team's two law student researchers, Ava Celia and Melissa Eigen, who will be presenting on their work throughout the semester, and our other team lead and clinical fellow, Ariel Ardura, who will be operating our slides. Next slide, please. As a general overview of our presentation, I will briefly cover the work we do in our clinic, particularly focusing on our work with food donation laws and policies. I will then hand it off to Ava and Melissa, who will present on food donation laws in Mississippi, specifically covering federal and state date labeling regulations, federal and state liability protection for food donation, and federal and state tax incentives for food donations. Now, just a little bit more about the clinic. The Food Law and Policy Clinic is an international leader in researching, analyzing, and documenting laws and policies related to food donation in the United States and abroad. FLPC faculty, attorneys, and students work collaboratively with community organizations and governments to use policy as a lever to support food donation for humanitarian and environmental objectives. Next slide, please. Our work across the clinic covers a variety of areas, some of which are pictured on your screen. Primary focus areas of the clinic include community food systems, food access and nutrition, and sustainable food productions. However, our biggest food projects do focus on reducing food waste. This is because our research has shown that more than 1/3 of food produced for human consumption is lost or wasted, despite the existence of an estimated 820 million people who go hungry globally. Our clinic aims to help drastically reduce food waste by breaking down barriers to food donation and thus increasing food access to those in need. As an example of the work we do, our Global Food Donation Policy Atlas project is an innovative partnership between FLPC and the Global Food Banking Network that maps the laws and policies affecting food donations in over 15 countries, including the United States. And some of this research will be covered later in this presentation. This project that aims specifically to understand national laws relating to food donation, compare laws across countries and regions, learn about food donation barriers, and share best practices and recommendations through partnerships with local nonprofits, businesses, government officials, and academics. Next slide, please. Our domestic food waste team takes a similar approach to the Global Food Donation Policy Atlas, but focuses more specifically to state and local laws across the United States. So how does our work lead to policy development, you might be asking? Well, we think strategically about how to use policy development to reduce barriers and increase the incentives through law and policy. We receive hundreds of emails and phone calls every year to help answer legal questions by donor businesses, food banks, or food rescue organizations, and policymakers at all levels of government who want to understand the law or are asking for advice to help make it easier to donate. We also try to help coordinate and drive policy conversations about how to reduce food waste. Next slide, please. So why are we focused on date labels, liability protection, and tax incentives for food donation? Our research has shown that these three policy categories are frequently viewed as the main areas that present barriers for food donation and therefore may cause additional food waste. Also, according to the EPA's food recovery hierarchy, which is on your screen right now, date labels, liability protection, and tax incentives are considered elements of the source reduction and feed hungry people most preferred categories, meaning they show the most promise in helping reduce food waste. Next slide, please. So now we've just gone through a lot of information about the clinic and our projects. So you might be wondering, where does Mississippi come in? First, as part of our domestic food waste team, we are focused on covering the laws of various states regarding date labels, liability protection, and tax incentives for food donation, as we mentioned. As part of the research that we do, we publish fact sheets like the one you see on your screen and we've done this for over 10 states and have conducted similar presentations to the one we're currently doing with all of you to stakeholders in each respective state. The fact sheets provide more details summarizing the existing federal and state laws covering the previously mentioned categories. And FLPC's work with the Mississippi Delta Project and our Mississippi partners led to the realization that putting together food donation fact sheets like we've done for other states could benefit Mississippi as well, particularly in light of new food security efforts that have emerged since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. In today's presentation, Ava and Melissa will be covering Mississippi's food donation laws and policies. As a reminder, our team aims to publish the Mississippi legal fact sheets that are currently in draft form and that will be available for you all for your review at the end of the presentation. So please do feel free to offer any feedback or suggestions or further questions you might have on the information you hear. And remember that our ultimate goal is to really provide you with useful information so that we can all work together to successfully reduce food waste and increase food donation to those in need. So thank you very much for joining us, and I will now pass it on to Ava, who will be covering our first section on date labels.
Thank you so much, Joseph. So date labels are the terms used to refer to the labels on food packaging that include dates accompanied by phrases such as use by, best before, sell by, and the many other phrases that you see on your screen. The reason why date labels matter when we are talking about food donations is because consumer confusion around what date labels mean frequently leads people to throw out food that is fit for consumption and that could otherwise be donated. Confusion around date labels also causes food distributors to be unsure of whether they may distribute past date or undated items. As we will discuss today, both federal and Mississippi state law are generally very permissive of past date donations and donations of undated items. Much of this consumer confusion stems from the lack of date label regulations. Currently, there is no federal law regulating date labels. States have broad discretion to regulate date labels and have enacted inconsistent laws as a result. In response to this patchwork regulatory landscape, food manufacturers have consistently labeled foods based on conservative estimates of quality or freshness rather than on food safety. So many consumers continue to mistakenly believe that date labels are related to foodborne safety, when in actuality, there is no evidence linking post-date consumption to foodborne illnesses. This consumer confusion leads up to 90% of Americans to occasionally throw out still fresh food and is estimated to account for 20% of consumer waste of safe edible food. This equates to approximately $29 billion of wasted consumer spending each year. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, there is no federal law regulating date labels. However, there are two federal agencies tasked with ensuring food safety and protecting consumers from deceptive labeling. That's the Food and Drug Administration and the US Department of Agriculture. The USDA regulates most meat, poultry, and certain processed egg products. The FDA regulates pretty much all of their food products, such as produce and processed foods. The USDA does not require date labels on any of the foods under its purview. However, if a USDA regulated food is dated, the agency requires that the label include a day and month for fresh products, or the day, month, and year for frozen or shelf-stable products, as well as an explanatory phrase such as sell by or use before. The FDA, on the other hand, does not require date labels on foods other than infant formula. Next slide, please. So we thought it would be a good idea to walk through some hypotheticals. And so right now we're going to go through a series of hypotheticals and how federal law applies to them. And if anyone would like to help me answer the questions and volunteer, please feel free to raise your hand and we will unmute you. So under federal law, if a donor donates packages of crackers that are not labeled with a date label, may the food bank distribute these crackers? And I apologize. I don't think I can see who's raising their hand, so also feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself too, if that's easier.
And what was the question? Should we serve those?
Yeah, so if someone donates a package of crackers that is not labeled, can a food bank then distribute those crackers even though there isn't a date label on it?
Yes,
Yes.
they can. It's not required anymore.
Exactly. So next slide, please. There is no federal law that would require packages of crackers be affixed with the date label. So you could go ahead and feel free to distribute those crackers. All right, next slide, please. So if a donor donates food on January 1st, and the food is a can of beans that are labeled best before December 25th, may the food bank distribute these beans to those in need?
Yes.
Awesome. So
Yes.
next slide, please. Same answer. Federal law does not forbid the donation of past date food products. All right, and the last hypothetical for the series is, on October 31st, a donor drops off cartons of store-bought eggs that were packed on October 1st. May the food bank distribute these eggs to those in need on October 31st?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. So
Yes.
under federal law, the past date donation of eggs is not forbidden. Next slide, please. So now in Mississippi, the state only regulates date labels on two categories of food: shucked molluscan shellfish and eggs. Common examples of shucked molluscan shellfish are oysters, clams, mussels, snails, squids, octopi, and scallops. Date labels are required on all containers and packages of fresh or frozen raw shucked molluscan shellfish. And Mississippi regulates these packages based on whether the package contains less than or more than 64 fluid ounces and whether the shellfish is fresh or frozen. Any person or company who fails to meet these requirements will have committed a misdemeanor and may be subject to a fine. If you'd like further information on how these regulations break down, please feel free to reach out to me after the presentation and I'd be happy to provide more information. So now the other category of food that Mississippi regulates date labels for are eggs. Mississippi law requires that eggs offered for sale be affixed with a label indicating the date the eggs were packed. However, this requirement does not apply to egg producers who sell their eggs directly on their own premises or egg producers who sell less than 6 dozen eggs per week. And Mississippi does not require that eggs have an expiration date label on them, but does offer guidance to producers should they choose to do so. So just to reiterate, what Mississippi does require is that packages of eggs include a label with the date that they were packed on, and then expiration date labels are only optional. Now, what I think is probably most important for you all to know is that Mississippi generally does not restrict past date sale or donations of food products. The one exception to this rule are the sale of eggs. Eggs cannot be sold for human consumption past 30 days from the date they were packed, including the date of pack. However, this rule again exempts eggs sold by producers who produce and sell their eggs on their own premises, and producers who sell less than 6 dozen eggs per week. And this rule also only applies to sales, not donations. So Mississippi state law does not restrict the past date donation of eggs. Next slide, please. So now we're going to walk through the same set of hypotheticals, but apply Mississippi law to them. So under Mississippi law, if a donor donates packages of crackers that are not labeled with the date label, may the food bank distribute these crackers?
Yes.
Right. So Mississippi law does not require that packages of crackers be affixed with date labels. So both Mississippi and federal law do not require that packages have date labels on them. All right, next slide, please. On January 1st, a donor donates cans of beans that are labeled best before December 25th. May the food bank distribute these beans to those in need?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. So Mississippi state law does not forbid the donation of past date food products. So again, neither Mississippi or federal law would restrict the donation of this item. Our last hypothetical, on October 31st, a donor drops off cartons of store-bought eggs that were packed on October 1st. May the food bank distribute these eggs to those in need?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. So although Mississippi law does restrict the past date sale of eggs, that does not apply to donations. So neither Mississippi or federal law would restrict the donation of these eggs. So I think one of the questions that comes to mind when going through these hypotheticals is, well, what happens if I donate or distribute past date food and the person who eats the food gets sick? This is where liability protections come in. Thank you. So restaurants, retailers, and other food businesses are often hesitant to donate because they fear being held liable in case someone gets sick from their donated food. Liability protections provide legal coverage for people who donate food in the case that someone gets sick from that food. By doing this, they make it easier for people to donate food by reducing concerns over legal liability. Next slide, please. So businesses, farms, and nonprofits that provide or receive donated food are generally well protected by federal law. The federal Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act provides a federal baseline of protections for food donors and distributing organizations. Donating individuals and businesses are protected when they donate qualifying food in good faith. Qualifying food is food that is apparently wholesome and that meets all qualifying and labeling standards imposed by federal, state, and local laws and regulations. The Act does not define what apparently wholesome means, but it's been generally understood to just mean food that is fit for sale. So food that comes in packaging that is not dented or unsealed or broken or leaking or anything like that. Now, even if a food doesn't meet all applicable standards, the donor can still be protected by the Act if they follow the Act's reconditioning purposes. So to do so, the donor must tell the nonprofit that the good is non-conforming. The nonprofit must then agree to recondition the item so that it is conforming, and the nonprofit must know the standard for reconditioning the item. And again, reconditioning just means the process by which to make the item then compliant with all applicable standards. Now, in order for the Act to apply, the donor must donate the food to a nonprofit organization, and the nonprofit organization must then distribute the food to needy populations who do not pay for the food. However, the Act does allow for one nonprofit to donate food to another nonprofit for distribution. The Act allows the first nonprofit to charge the distributing nonprofit a nominal fee to cover handling and processing costs. If all of these conditions are met, the Emerson Act is quite protective of donors and does not hold a donor liable unless the donor acts with gross negligence or intentional misconduct. This pretty much just means that an individual or organization should not donate or facilitate the distribution of donated food that the individual or organization knows is likely to be harmful or dangerous. And now I'm going to pass it on over to my colleague, Melissa, who's going to run through some hypotheticals.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ava. So like Ava mentioned, we'll run through a couple of hypotheticals about liability protection. So the first question is, suppose that a donor donates a can of tuna to a food bank with no noticeable dents, leaks, or damages to the can of tuna. The best before date on the can has passed, and the recipient got sick from the can of tuna. Will the donor and donee organization be protected by the liability protection? And feel free to unmute yourself and answer.
I don't think they'll be protected.
Could you run me through why you think that?
I think that one step in the, I guess, acceptable foods process was skipped because you should have checked the date on it too.
Yeah, got it. So that's actually really tricky. So just to hammer home what Ava was talking about, there aren't any restrictions on past date labeling donations. So actually both the donor and you as a food bank would be protected from the liability protection. The only thing is the food must seem fit for consumption. So here there are no dents or leaks or damage. So you checked off that box. And then as long as there is no gross negligence or intentional misconduct, you would both be protected even though the date label has passed.
So is that a part of the good faith initiative in regards to what she spoke about?
Yeah, that's part of the Good Samaritan Act at the federal level.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, so the second question, suppose that a donor donates a moldy loaf of bread to a food bank and the food bank notices this, but still distributes the moldy bread and the recipient gets sick. Will the donor and donee be protected?
No.
Not at all. Should not.
Exactly. Next slide, please. You're all correct here. Obviously, in this case, that would be grossly negligent to notice the moldy bread and still pass it off to individuals, so they would not be protected under the Good Samaritan Act. Okay, next slide, please. I'll now talk about state level liability protection. So like many states, Mississippi has their own state law for liability protection for both food donors and donee organizations that existed prior to the enactment of the Good Samaritan Act. But this protection is slightly different from the new federal protection. The pre-existing law still does track most of the same level of liability protection, but the Good Samaritan Act is slightly more expansive and now protects donors and donee organizations. And in case there is a discrepancy between the federal law and the old Mississippi state law, the new federal law, which covers more ground and provides more coverage, would preempt the Mississippi law and would cover donors and donees in case the Mississippi law did not provide that coverage. So Mississippi law, like I mentioned, has protections for both food donors and the donee organizations. So I will start with the donor, which is largely the same as the Good Samaritan Act that Ava described previously. The donation must be made in good faith of food that is fit for consumption. And while the law doesn't exactly define what fit for consumption means, it does say that any canned goods which are leaking or swollen or dented would not be protected under any liability protection at the state level. The donations must be made for free to the food bank, and which in turn must be given to the end organization for free. This is slightly different from the Good Samaritan Act. It doesn't have the extra protection when food is donated between two nonprofits for a nominal fee. All food at the state level must be donated for free between the donor to the donee and the donee to the individual. But again, this would be covered by the Good Samaritan Act protection. And donations from the donor direct to individuals aren't recovered. So if I donated direct to an individual, that wouldn't be covered by the liability protection. If any injury results from gross negligence or intentional misconduct, the protection wouldn't apply, which is similar to the Good Samaritan Act. And then switching to liability protections for the donee organizations. This exists for any charitable or nonprofit organization as well. The organization must reasonably determine that the food is fit for consumption prior to donating the item. Again, the donation must be received for free from the donor and then given for free to the recipient. There's one main difference between the Mississippi state law and the Good Samaritan Act, which is the protection here is only in cases of strict liability, meaning cases where the food bank didn't actually do anything wrong, but would be held liable anyway. So this protection doesn't extend to cases of negligence, and negligence would just mean if the organization failed to take precautions and it caused the injury or illness. So for instance, if the organization failed to reasonably determine that the food item was safe and they still donated it, that would be negligent. But however, the Good Samaritan Act has expanded coverage to donee organizations. So it covers cases of ordinary negligence, so long as there isn't gross negligence, and would preempt the state law in this case and provide protection for the food banks. Okay, next slide, please. So switching over to our third and final topic, everybody's favorite topic, taxes. So why are taxes important to all of you? Tax incentives really help encourage businesses to donate food by providing them with a financial incentive for donation. There are financial incentives and donation initiatives for individuals too, but our focus here in this presentation is on businesses. Okay, so next slide, please. Most businesses donating food qualify for one of the following deductions, which reduces the amount of taxes that they would owe on their federal tax returns. And there are two types of federal level deductions. So here, the first deduction is a general deduction. So this deduction, under this, businesses that donate food inventory can deduct the item's basis, which means its cost to the business. So what you as the business purchased the food for. This would usually be lower than the market value of the food. In a typical scenario, most businesses can deduct up to 50%. It's usually 30 to 50% of their annual income under this deduction, with a specific limitation for C corporations, which usually can't deduct more than 10% of their annual taxable income under this deduction. And in order to qualify, the donation must be given to a qualified organization, which is defined under the federal tax code, and the donation must be used for charitable purposes. Next slide, please. So we'll now do a hypothetical question about the general deduction, and hopefully there shouldn't be any math involved, so hopefully this should be not too difficult. So to suppose a business donates food that costs them $1,000, how much would they be able to deduct under the general deduction when filing their tax returns?
Was that the 10% one?
Yeah, so the 10% is the total amount they're able to take off of their taxable income in the year. But for the $1,000 of
Oh,
donation,
50%.
how much would they be able to deduct? And no worries if you don't know the answer.
50%.
That's what like businesses that aren't C corporations can deduct in a year. So I know it's really confusing with the taxes, and luckily most businesses have accountants that can hopefully figure this out. But the answer would be $1,000.
Okay.
Which, yeah, so exactly what it costs the business to buy the food in the first place under this general deduction, that's what they're able to deduct for this food. And they can keep deducting more up to like 30 to 50% of their annual income in a year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. I know it's a little confusing. Okay, next slide, please. So there's a second type of deduction, and this is called the enhanced deduction. And here the deduction for donated food inventory is almost double the general deduction, meaning that companies have an extra incentive to donate food. They can deduct up to twice the item's basis or twice the cost to the company at a maximum. there's just a few extra steps they must take to qualify for this enhanced deduction. So they must donate to a qualified 501c3 organization, and the food must be used exclusively for charitable purposes, which means that there are fewer qualifying organizations that you can donate to under the enhanced deduction than with the general deduction. In addition to that, food donors must receive a written statement from the food bank describing what the food will be used for. And food must also comply with any food safety requirement at the federal level in order to apply for this deduction. So next slide, please. Okay, here's a hypothetical about the enhanced deduction. So same scenario, suppose a business donates a food item and it costs them $1,000. How much would they be able to deduct under the enhanced deduction when filing their federal tax return?
2,000.
Yes, that is correct. So yeah, up to $2,000 at a maximum. So pretty much double the general deduction. Next slide, please. Okay, so switching to state level tax incentives. So many states have actually copied the federal tax deductions into their state code, but Mississippi does something a little bit different and actually uses their own calculations to determine state tax deductions. And Mississippi doesn't have a deduction that's specific to food, but they do have a deduction for charitable contributions of gifts. The deduction is calculated based on the actual market value of the food item when it's donated. So that would be, if they didn't donate the food, what they could have charged for that item, which slightly differs from the federal deduction. And actually in most cases would be higher than the federal deduction. Businesses can deduct up to 20% of their annual taxable income under this deduction. And similar to the federal deduction, it applies when making it to qualified organizations, which in this law means organizations that exist solely for religious, charitable, scientific, or educational purposes. So meaning there are a wide variety of organizations you can donate to and get this state tax deduction. Whether or not a type of gift is deductible is subject to rules and regulations put forth by the commissioner and approved by the governor of Mississippi. Okay, next slide, please. We have one final hypothetical question. Okay, so similar scenario to before. Suppose a business donates a food item that costs them $1,000. And if the business had sold instead of donated the food, they could have charged $1,500 for it. So how much can they deduct under Mississippi's charitable contribution deduction on their state returns?
Up to 20%?
Yeah, so they can deduct up to 20% of their annual taxable income. And in this case, next slide, please. They could deduct also like $1,500. So it's actually, instead of what it cost the business, if they could sell it for $1,500, they would get a $1,500 deduction as well. And just to make a note, if you deduct on your state deduction, you can also use the federal deduction as well. So states have the benefit at the federal level and then also at the state level. Okay, last slide. So key takeaways from today, if there's anything we want you to get out of this presentation. So for date labels, Mississippi does not restrict past state donation of food products, which helps reduce food waste since consumers can donate food that they might otherwise throw away. Under liability protection, the Good Samaritan Act provides expansive protection for food donors and donee organizations from legal liability at both the federal and state levels. And this eliminates some of the barriers that might otherwise prevent consumers from donating food. And finally, when businesses donate food, they are eligible to receive tax deductions. And this helps encourage them to donate food by providing a financial incentive. So thank you all so much for listening to this presentation today. And we'd now like to invite you to ask any questions.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Joseph, Ava, and Melissa. That was a great presentation. I hope everyone was taking notes and have some questions to offer the panelists or the presenters. I know we have one, Anna Kleiner, put one into the chat box, and she's saying that there's some retailers that are donating large boxes of meat, chicken specifically, to food pantries, but the food pantries aren't able to break up those packages into smaller portions for people that want to receive the food donations. Are you all aware of any laws that are prohibiting food pantries from breaking up this food?
Thank you very much for the question. So we, in just preliminary research, have not particularly come across this type of issue, but I will say that if it is food that is donated as part of a food box program or anything of that nature, generally there are specifications about the type of meat or the packaging that the meat has to be displayed in or provided to by the end consumer. And the other possibility, although this is something that we are happy to look into a little bit in more detail to get an official confirmation, is that the inspection rules for meat are very stringent, and as soon as it's broken from its original package, that generally removes any liability protection for end consumers or for food donors. So in that instance, that would be something that would fall outside of the scope of the Emerson Act on the federal level, possibly. Again, this is something that we will definitely look into in order to get an official response to that question, but those are what we think would likely be the reasons for that.
Thank you, Joseph. And no one has posed any other questions in the chat box, but luckily, since I am the moderator, I get to pose some questions to the presenters. When it comes to the Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, are there any foods that are not explicitly covered by the act?
Yeah, thanks for your question. The Good Samaritan Act doesn't explicitly reference a list of foods. So that would mean there isn't anything explicitly not allowed to be covered by the act, just so long as it meets the standards for fit for consumption and there's no gross negligence or intentional misconduct.
Okay, that's good to know. I know we covered a lot of information that you all have to have some questions. I know I have a few that are, okay, I see one from Keith. How do you recommend food pantry markets? How do you recommend food pantries market the enhanced deduction opportunity?
Yeah, the enhanced deduction is really helpful because businesses could almost double the tax deduction that they can take on that. So I guess if a business comes to you and asks about what are their financial incentives, you can let them know about the enhanced deduction. And just as part of that, you as the food bank have to provide them, like I mentioned before in the presentation, just a description of what the food is being used for. So making sure you comply with all of that to help the businesses actually get that deduction.
All right, thank you. And Joseph, thank you for answering the question, but I'll just make sure it's available for everyone to know about. These slides will be available once we're done with this session. So we will provide you with this information after the session is over. Marvin is asking, why wouldn't expired dates expose the pantries to any liability?
Thank you for that question. So under the Good Samaritan Act, donors are only exposed to liability if they act with gross negligence or, excuse me, I'm forgetting the phrase, gross negligence or intentional misconduct. And so if if the food item is past date, but it seems to be in perfectly fine condition otherwise. So if it's, for instance, the can of beans example, if it's past date, but the can is still intact and there's no reason for the donor to believe that the cans are like not fit for consumption, the federal Good Samaritan Act would cover them. However, like in Melissa's example with the moldy bread, because like a reasonable person would notice the mold and should therefore refrain from donating or facilitating the distribution of that moldy bread, the Good Samaritan Act would not cover that donor or distributor. I don't know if Joseph or Melissa, if you want to provide any more clarifying information for that one.
I think that was a good summary.
Okay, we have a few more questions rolling in. Well, Keith he wants to know, is an enhanced deduction a better tax incentive than giving cash to food pantries?
Yeah, I think it really would depend how much they're donating and the type of business and their corporate tax structure. So I know, and it depends is not the best answer, but yeah, it really does. It really depends how much they're donating. And I hope that businesses would have accountants, and just by making the business aware of the enhanced deduction, they would be able to weigh their options in terms of what the best financial incentive is for them.
Okay. And Shalonda is making a point. I think, Anna, you might be able to use this information. I guess once you break down the original package into a smaller package, as long as you put a label on it, I think that's when you can redistribute it. So I think that might be helpful to many people on this call. Any more questions? I have a few locked and loaded, ready to go if no one has a question. Okay. Okay, Jason is making sure we know that you have to have an appropriate ServSafe certificate in order to break down the food items. I guess these are things that we are going to note, and if we can find the answers to them, we'll definitely let people know. If we can find the specific law that explains why or when you can break down these food boxes, we'll definitely let you all know what we find. As far as date labels, with respect to accepting past date donated food, does it make any difference what phrase is used for the date label?
No, so neither federal or Mississippi law distinguishes between phrases that suggest quality or phrases that suggest quality being like best before versus phrases that would maybe say use before. And so because the law doesn't differentiate between those phrases, it doesn't matter.
Very helpful. Any more questions? But I think we have time for maybe one or two more. If you all have anything, I don't want to use up all of your time with my questions, but I will if I have to. Okay, I'll just throw out one more, and if anybody has one, they can follow up behind mine. When it comes to tax incentives, who can receive federal tax incentives for food donations?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know I focused on the businesses, but for the general deduction, any US taxpayer does qualify for the general deduction. It's the enhanced deduction that's a little bit more limited. Right now, it's actually for all businesses, which includes C corporations, S corporations, LLCs, and the like. So they're all eligible for that enhanced deduction.
Okay, great. So not seeing any more questions. I just want to thank you all again, Joseph, Ariel, Melissa, and Ava, and you too, Emma, because you helped bring this together. Thank you for this great presentation. I hope people were taking notes. I see we had a few questions, and once we give everyone the information that we have, the slides and everything, they can take this information home back to their counties and to the food pantries, and we'll better serve the Delta. Now that we're done with the presentations, we'll allow Keith to give any updates that he might have to the CARES Act grant funding. And then once Keith gets done, I will announce the winner of the $250 door prize from the Maddox Foundation. So Keith, you can take it away.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Terrence. Yeah, that was overly impressive. So I sent most of you who were presenting, I sent you a LinkedIn request. So if you can accept my LinkedIn request. So I don't know if I would eat an out of date beignet from New Orleans, if whoever went to Tulane, Ava, but I've done that before, stale beignets. I don't know if there's any liability in that. So, well, that's just wonderful. So, money makes everything happen. And so what we've talked about in the past few months is the CARES Act, and the Community Foundation has received $1.2 million to grant to nonprofits. 2 pools of money, $600,000 for reimbursement for food purchases for COVID-19 issues, and then $600,000 to reimburse nonprofits for COVID-19 expenses such as PPE, technology, working from home, and other categories. So we have received 48 applications have been created, 27 that have not been completed. 48 apps started but not completed. We've had 27 completed applications. Of those 27 completed applications, 10 have been approved, and that approval is a total of about $50,000. So just hear that figure. We've got 1.2 million to give away by the end of December, and we've only been able to approve 10. So I'm encouraging everyone on the call to get back into your applications and start completing them. So I've contacted all 27 who have applied and completed the application. We've talked to them either on the phone, email, or through the grants portal. So a couple of changes I'll mention, and hopefully it'll make it easier. Item 18 was the one that caused our community foundations the biggest heartburn. That was reimbursing on the nonprofit side for rent and utilities and mortgages. And at the last minute before we were ready to launch, a accounting firm came in and told us we could not reimburse just straight out rent and utilities, that it had to be related to COVID, and overage in rent and utilities due to COVID-19 expenses. So that has caused some issues with us having to go back to the nonprofits who had already submitted. So that's one issue that we're addressing. So, but to make up for that, the good news is the CPA firm said that we can reimburse the nonprofits. Now, this is really important. We can reimburse nonprofits for loss of revenue from fundraising events. Loss of revenue from fundraising events. So I talked to a couple of nonprofits last week and this week who were not able to do, whether it was a hamburger cookout or a chili cook-off or a festival. Charleston Cares was not able to do their big arts fundraiser. Last year they raised $19,000. This year they only brought in $9,000. So they are eligible for that difference of $10,000. So I hope that makes sense to everybody on the call. That's a new opportunity for us, the loss of revenue on fundraisers. So we just need documentation on what was raised last year and what was raised this year. So Terrence, I think that's my update. Go to our website and then you can click on the MS CARES Act and just get back into your portal, and please send it to one other change. Excuse me, this is a major change. And these changes are coming every week. So it's not anything the community foundations have a say in. This is Mississippi Development Authority and the CPA firms that were hired. So one other change is they did away with that you had to be a 501c3. The only requirement to be eligible is you have to be registered at the Mississippi Secretary of State's office. So that throws it wide open on the number of nonprofits who could possibly be eligible. So Terrence, if there's not any questions about that, I'll give a brief update about the USDA Farmers to Families Phase 4 food boxes, but I'll pause now, Terrence, and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to take yourself off mute very briefly or drop it in the chat box.
I have a question. Keith,
Go ahead,
can you
Ms.
hear me?
Davis.
Okay.
Yeah, just tell me who's talking.
I sent my application in probably 2 or 3 days after it got out there to be submitted, and I haven't heard one word on it. I haven't heard from anybody saying it's not
Well,
approved. I haven't heard from anybody to say it's approved. I hadn't heard a thing
Well,
on it.
well, who's chewing me out? I don't even know who's chewing me out. Who
Gloria
is this?
Dickerson?
Oh, okay. Well, I'll talk to you after this, Gloria. I'll get with you about it.
Yeah, but I don't know what happened with mine. I mean, it went
No,
in
no,
early. It wasn't late.
I've got it, Gloria. I've got it. And believe me,
do
I've
have
looked
it?
at, I've got it and I have looked at it and I will get back with you because you're very important. She's in Drew, Mississippi, Ava, home of Archie Manning. So we're gonna
Okay.
we're gonna
Get
take
back
care
with
of
me
Drew.
and tell me
Yeah.
what I did wrong, because I hadn't heard anything from
No.
anybody.
If there's something wrong, I'm gonna tell you because we're gonna try to get everyone as much money as possible. So the maximum that a nonprofit can get for COVID-19 relief is 12,000. A maximum
okay.
a food pantry can get is 12,000 for reimbursement for food expenses. So we're going to do everything we can to get the maximum because you as a nonprofit, you can get 12,000 on the nonprofit side and 12,000 on the food side since you're a food pantry also.
Okay.
All right, so keep chewing on me and I'll call you right after this.
All right then. Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Terrence.
Yeah,
Mu-
and
mute ev-
just two more
mute
things.
every-
Mary is having the same issue. I'm sure Keith, you'll be able to get in contact with Hernando Meals on Wheels about their
Yes.
grant application. And the last thing was Brenda Lynn is asking, how do you input receipts for the grant application?
How do you
Yes, I'm
input?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Brendan.
Oh, my question is, like, I have daily receipts for individual when I purchase the food. So I was
Right.
wondering, do I have to go in there and do each individual receipt, or am I able to tally it up and do it weekly to input it on you all's spreadsheet?
Yeah, Brenda. So the rule is, again, this is the rule we were given, is that a nonprofit food pantry can apply one time. So you've already applied for the 4,000, right?
No.
Have you already
I didn't
submitted at
complete-
all? Well, then
I started it, but I hadn't completed it because of concerns with the receipts. It's like I got about 300 some receipts.
Okay.
Because it's an individual thing, daily.
Okay. Well, all right. Okay. Now I'll give you my recommendation, Brenda. You collect all those receipts, and after November 15th, you're eligible for up to $12,000. So that's my recommendation: is you keep those receipts and submit them after November 15th for as much as, but you submit them all at one time, not individual receipts. So my phone number, Terrence, I'm gonna give my number. Just everybody can write it down, and I hope I've been responsive to everybody except my friend and Drew, Gloria. So I apologize for that. But my phone number is 662-719-1732. 662-719-1732. Stacy, if you don't mind, if you're on, Stacy, drop that into the chat and my email address also. I don't know. But please contact me as much as you want, because that's our goal, is to give this money out. It's federal money. Community foundations have never dealt like this with federal money and get the money out.
Okay.
If nothing else, Terrence, that USDA Phase 4 food box.
Yeah, absolutely.
so-
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, what these Harvard attorneys, Emma, this is just, it was outstanding. I mean, I learned a lot. I'm at home now, so I went to my refrigerator and I was looking at what I thought was the expiration date on the eggs. And I was looking at the canned goods, what I thought was an expiration date. So now I can tell my children, eat it. It's not out of date. So you're saving me money even here at my own house. But I really do appreciate the opportunity that you're opening up about these legal issues of food donations. So USDA Phase 4 of the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. We had Elizabeth Loper on our Hunger Summit 2, and she is the person over the USDA Farmers to Families Food Box Program. So Phase 4 was approved just last Friday. So this is what we learned of Phase 4. Palazola Produce out of Memphis got the entire contract to distribute USDA Farmers to Families food boxes for the entire state of Mississippi and the entire state of Tennessee. If you remember under phase 3, that was a 15, and I see your mouth gasping, but that was a $15 million contract. So if you remember under phase 3, 5 different companies divided up Mississippi 82 counties and were distributing the USDA food boxes. So USDA making all the decisions consolidated to Palazola, taking care of Mississippi and Tennessee. So you can go onto our website, go onto our YouTube channel, and you can see a distribution that was held today in Holly Springs, Marshall County of USDA phase 4 food boxes. So one nonprofit, now listen to this, one nonprofit in Mississippi was selected to distribute all 150,000 boxes of USDA. So you hear what I'm saying? One single produce company, Palazola, one single nonprofit, the Mississippi Crisis Foundation. Mississippi Crisis Foundation out of Clarksdale, who we have become best friends with. Believe me, we've gotten close to the Mississippi Crisis Foundation because they're doing wonderful work. So if you need food in your area and you're not receiving USDA food, you can contact our office and we will do everything. Is that not right, Brenda Smith? Brenda? All right. Brenda, we will stay on top of your needs. So Mississippi Crisis Foundation, we mentioned Sledge, Mississippi, Charlie Pride's hometown, very underserved area. They have agreed to send 500 boxes about once every 2 weeks through the end of December to Sledge, Mississippi. So if you've got outlying areas in the counties that we're working in that you think desperately need these food boxes, just email me or contact Brenda and we'll do everything we can to push food there. We have paid our community foundation with North Central Electric and with the Tennessee Valley Authority. We have rented a refrigerated truck through the month of December. Well, we made a gift to the Crisis Foundation. They have rented a truck and they will distribute food boxes to locations that we recommend. We cannot mandate, but we can recommend. Does that make sense, Terrence? So I don't want anybody thinking we're controlling the food boxes. We're controlling the donations. So as long as those donations come, hopefully they'll think favorably on our recommendations of who needs food boxes. So that's how phase 4 is looking.
Let me ask a question. This Gloria again.
Yes.
Okay, on the last phase, we were getting a truck in probably twice a week with food on it, lots of pallets of food. So are you saying that the Crisis Foundation is the one who had the contract now and they're going to deliver all they can in just a refrigerated vehicle? I mean, we had the big long 18-wheelers to bring in food to Drew.
All right, Gloria, which produce company were you getting from twice a week in Sunflower County?
I can't think of the name right now, but the truck came twice a week and we distributed it all over Sunflower County. We went to Dyersville, went to Ruleville, we went into Tallahatchie County, giving some of the food away, and then Drew, but I can't remember the name of the company right now.
Okay, all right. If it's not Palazola produce, then those trucks won't be coming. But yes, semi 18-wheeler trucks will be coming to Sunflower County. Now, Bill Blackwelder is the executive director of the Mississippi Crisis Foundation. I'll find out exactly from him where those stops are being made, but you will get trucks of food. We have helped rent a refrigerated truck to get additional food in. We're bringing additional food boxes on top of what Mississippi was allocated. That's what our effort has been. So we could hit, some of the isolated areas. But look at the MS Crisis Foundation on Facebook and you'll see the areas that they're serving.
So they are serving Sunflower County, so Drew will be getting some more food in. Because the people are asking, that's why I'm asking. They want to know when the truck gonna come again.
Yes, and I'll get you exact information, Gloria, when that truck will arrive. But it's coming from the Mississippi Crisis Foundation.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And anybody else have any more questions for Keith before we conclude today's summit?
I did. We were getting it over the summer once a week from Mississippi Fruit and Vegetable out of Grenada. Do you got any updates on that for Holmes County?
Who's asking?
Marvin.
Hey, Marvin, and I've gotten to know Lee Boone at Grenada Produce. They did not get the contract.
Okay.
So it's,
So I just
no,
have to
you can
follow up.
yeah, no, you're in, no, but we have given this, we gave our list to the Mississippi Crisis Foundation of all of our partners, and the Mississippi Crisis Foundation has selected certain nonprofits in certain counties to deliver to. And so Grenada will be getting food through the Mississippi Crisis Foundation. Now, who's going to be the nonprofit that receives it? I'm not sure, but Grenada County will be getting USDA food boxes. But I can,
Well-
you call me later and I'll tell you, I'll find out from Mississippi Crisis Foundation which nonprofit in Grenada will receive the food boxes.
Okay, I'll call you, but it's about Holmes County, not Grenada.
Oh, Holmes. Yeah, let me check on Holmes. I'm sorry. I thought you said Grenada. Let me check on Holmes. And if we need to run our truck down to Holmes that we rented, we'll try to do that, because Holmes County is one of the poorest counties in the entire country.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll follow up.
Where I've got European relatives buried. So I'm gonna take care of my relatives in Holmes County.
Hey, Keith, this is Catrice in Tate County. Do you by chance, will Tate County be receiving anything?
Yes, I was at Marshall County today, and you can, yeah, it's Tate County. Yes, it's definitely.
I don't know.
Now, when I say
Okay.
somebody me off, they knocked me off. That's the Mississippi Crisis Foundation decision where those trucks go. But I heard Bill Blackwelder say this morning, Tate County. Yes.
Okay.
But my recommendation is you go on that MS Crisis, and it's with Crisis with 2 I's Foundation. And it's a new nonprofit. Now, don't ask me how they got in the food business. But anyway, and how they cornered the market. We're just blessed that we're able as a community foundation to donate to that foundation nonprofit, and we were the first donor ever for private support to it. So we're right up in the middle of trying to steer and direct food and support their work. They're doing extremely valuable work.
Yes, that's awesome. Okay, thank you.
So Barbara Benson, who just texted me, stop texting me. You're bumping me off of this call, and don't call me because you bumped me off the Zoom call. But Barbara, yes, a truck is coming to Grenada, and we'll find out where it's going.
What about Hines County?
You know, who's asking that about Hines?
Katina Grant?
Yeah, Katina, I don't know about Hines. Again, that's a Mississippi Crisis Foundation a decision, but you might want to just go on their website or their Facebook page and ask that question, but I'm not sure. I've only been interested in the counties that our community foundation is working in, so I don't know about Hines.
Keith, this is Carson. Is any truck coming to DeSoto County?
Oh, definitely. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. The Dream Center. Have you been watching the Dream Center?
Absolutely.
All that. Do you know where they're getting their food? You know where they're getting their food? Mississippi Crisis Foundation.
Oh.
That's who's supplying the Dream Center. So although the Dream Center is, getting most of the publicity, it is coming from the designated, they're the designated nonprofit by the Mississippi Crisis Foundation.
What about Coahoma County?
Of course, Coahoma, Bill Blackwelder, who runs the Mississippi Crisis, lives in Clarksdale. Do you know him? He's a deputy sheriff.
No, I don't.
Now,
but I'll get to know him. This is Josephine.
Josephine. Of course, I've been loving all on him, and I don't mind to say that. I'm half Lebanese, so any Lebanese will do anything for the food or the money. So you can look at our YouTube channel, and I'm getting ready to post some video from Marshall County this morning. But Bill partners with the sheriff's departments, the police department, and the fire, and the mayors to distribute the food. It's just a beautiful, beautiful undertaking when you see people who look like they're desperate. They're out delivering food to those who are even more desperate. Does that make sense, Terrence? I mean, and I'm trying to capture them on video because it's these, people living on the gravel roads, dirt roads, who are taking care of each other. It's, the best of humanity that we're seeing.
Absolutely. It shows a true character when there's a time of crisis. It depends on how we act in that time that'll define us. So I don't see any more questions. Again, I want to thank Emma Scott and the FLPC team for their presentation. Keith, thank you so much for your updates for the CARES Act funding and the USDA food boxes. I want to let everyone know our next and last installment of this Hunger Summit will take place on December 3rd, Thursday, December 3rd, the first Thursday of December. This one is actually going to take place during our regular time, which is 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. Central. And we'll give an overview of our Health and Hunger Atlas. Delta Directions partner, and CAFR will present on the Health and Hunger Atlas. And before we get out of here, like I promised, I will announce the winner of the $250 door prize. Beforehand, please forgive me. I will not take the risk of pronouncing your last name. It's just too risky. But the winner of the door prize is Mary L, and the last name is spelled Fuchs.
Congratulations to Mary.
You went muted, Terrence. You went muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was explaining how I couldn't take the risk of pronouncing your last name wrong. So I made sure I put it in the chat box. So I'm glad you missed my entire explanation. I'm trying to save myself. But yes, Mary with Hernando Meals on Wheels, you are the winner of this session's door prize. All right. So I might have been muted during the announcement of our next and last Hunger Summit. It is going to be on Thursday, December 3rd, and it will give a brief overview of our Health and Hunger Atlas given by Delta Directions partner and CAFR. Okay. So with that being said, thank you so much for coming out and being a part of this third session. And I look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Bye.
All right, bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good
Thank
day.
you, Terrence. Thank you, Harvard.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I'm not going on.